Hi, I'm Taylor, and I make things. Today's thing is a dresser. Now, normally I do just like a straight, step-by-step build of what I did, and kind of walk through as if this is a tutorial. But honestly, partially, I got a little excited while I was making this project and missed some of the bits while I was filming. And also there's a lot of those kind of videos on YouTube already for just making projects. And this particular project, this dresser, is mostly putting rectangles together. So I think it's a little bit less exciting or interesting to walk through like just the step-by-step process of everything I did, and more talk about some of the thought processes along the way, why I made certain choices, any mistakes along the way, which there were plenty, and how I handled those. Because if I can impart any wisdom, I think it would be how to recover from mistakes. Because I have to. So often. So let's jump back a little bit and talk about this project. A couple months ago, wait, what is it? 6 months ago, oh no. My wife said, hey, it'd be great if we could get a new dresser. The dresser we have is a little bit small. And so we looked at some online, and after looking at the ones she liked and looking at the prices of them, I said, hey, you know what? I bet I could build one, and it would only cost, like double what we're looking for online. But hey, I get to make it, and now it's a project. So, win, or it's a different lose-win, but I'll take it. But all jokes aside, I was actually excited to work on a dresser because from a design perspective, it's fairly straightforward. You get a rectangle, you put some drawers in it, you put clothes inside. How hard could it be? But I've also been kind of straying away from building larger furniture lately. I'd been making a lot of excuses. But last summer I got to make this workshop, and now I can't use space as an excuse. I definitely have room to make my projects, even if it's a cluttered mess in here. I'm definitely still learning to flex those design muscles, and this is not a piece where I felt like I was gonna go nuts on it. Just looked at a lot of the things that my wife was already picking out and asked her for a lot of feedback, and eventually landed on something that made sense. So first and foremost, our current dresser we knew had 6 drawers, and that was part of our limiting factor. We liked the size of the drawers, the depth, everything, that was great. We just really wanted like 2 more drawers for socks. Easy change, boom. Add 2 drawers, and now we've got the size and the dimensions that we want. The only other question was the depth, and for that, I just went and looked at drawer slides and landed on, I think, 15-inch drawer slides. A couple other constraints that my wife had was she wanted a lip around the top. Functionally, this is just because we have to have it about 1 inch away from the wall. There's an outlet back there that we can't really move, and that's where we plug in our little smart speaker thing. So it pushes it off the wall a little bit. And then of course we don't want the dresser just sitting on the ground, so I put a little base frame in the design, a little curve along the bottom for accent, and now we can get to building the dresser. So, dresser design in mind, I headed up, grabbed some lumber, and got to work. The first part's pretty straightforward. I was turning those rough cut boards into smooth, flat, rectangular prism pieces. Most of that milling work is very straightforward, and in my other videos and in any woodworking video online, so I'm gonna skip basically all of that. Except, there is one piece, and you might have seen this trick before, but I had a couple boards because I was trying to have things like the drawer faces each be one piece that were gonna be wider than my jointer. So to make them flat, I kinda had 2 options. I could either get out my hand plane and smooth them flat entirely manually, or I could do something like build a jig out of some plywood to work as a sled, and then run that through the planer with some shims in it to get one side flat, and then I can flip it over and plane it like normal. And obviously I did the cut the footage. The purpose of that sled, in case it's not super clear, is that boards sometimes have warps and twists in them, and when you run it through the planer, it can rock back and forth. So you get 2 parallel sides, but they won't necessarily be flat sides. They'll, ride each other's curves and they'll match, but that's not what you want. You want a flat board all the way across. So you run it through the planer and basically trick it into being a joiner. by having just the top surface get skimmed until it's skimming a flat surface without the board being able to rock thanks to those shims. Once you got that done, you can then flatten it out. And because I knew I was going to be doing a glue up, I also then went and edge jointed the pieces. I mean, honestly, you do that even if you weren't doing a panel glue up if you want, straight edges. But so I jointed the edges. And this is where I ran into one of the few things that's been slowing me down of making bigger furniture is my current jointer. It's a benchtop one. It's worked great for the last few projects I've done when I'm working with boards, like maybe up to 4 feet long. The helical head in it works really nicely, and you can get nice straight edges on it. The problem is that the bed is pretty short. And so when I'm working with things like, when we've got boards 5 feet long, or they're also quite thick, they tend to rock back and forth. And so even after multiple passes through where I'm really trying to hold it as straight and flat across as I can, I end up with a little bit of bow. And so when I go and put those boards together, you end up with little gaps here. So I had a couple options again in mind. And all of these are perfectly viable. I ended up picking my personal favorite, but let me go through them. One, again, you could build just like the sled I did on the planer that I'm pointing to and you can't see. Just like I did on the planer, you can build a sled, but instead of it being shimmed so that the top gets skimmed, you hang just one edge over the end of the plywood. So for example, I've got this raggedy piece of wood here. We're gonna ignore this split for now, that's not part of this, but we got an edge that we wanna be straight. What we do is take a piece of plywood and cut it straight, and then clamp this board down so that the edge is just hanging off, and then run that through our table saw, where we have a known straight edge here, we have a known straight edge that we can ride along the fence, and we just trim off this last little bit, and now we know we have a square side. Personally, I think that's a great option, but the struggle I've had with that is on these longer boards, unless you have like 3/4 inch ply laying around, which I didn't at the time, the sled as you're pushing it through can flex a little bit, and then it's kind of hard to keep it straight when running through the saw, but that's also just a personal gripe with it. If that's your favorite method, go for it every time. What I did instead was, because I was lucky enough to have an 8-inch jointer plane, I just put it in my workbench, sandwiched them together, and started planing. And the upside here is now that I've got those sandwiched together, when I book match them back out, I know that the angles will be complementary, so even if I had a slight, curve to the left or the right as I was planing across, they're gonna be matching up, and I'm gonna get that nice perfect 90 as long as I get a consistent flat along the combined edges. Real quick sidebar, come here. I realize when I drop tools like an 8-inch jointer plane and stuff like that, it sounds like I've got this crazy workshop and I must be loaded, right? No, but I wanted to be clear, you don't have to buy all these tools in one go, and you certainly don't have to buy all of these tools. The 8-inch plane that I happen to, or not 8-inch, the number 8, I keep calling it an 8-inch, it's a number 8 plane. I think I've got it around here. I want to be clear, I love this. This is an incredible tool. I got it for free, not because I'm an amazing YouTuber. I have like 300 subs. I got it because my uncle got it from his friend for free because it had gotten rusty. And I guess that guy had never heard of Evaporust. And so I was lucky enough to get this as a gift because he had 2, and now I have 1. It's a fantastic tool, but it's not because I went out and decided I need it and I bought it, got it as a gift, so I used it. The point isn't to instead just get an uncle who will give you gifts. If you can, do that, it's awesome. But really, you can hunt for tools. My drill press over there was like $150 that I got on Craigslist. My miter saw I got on Facebook Marketplace, I think for $200. But the idea is keep an eye out for things like auction sites, Facebook Marketplace, all of that. You can score great tools for great prices. There are definitely people out there selling their tools who don't know what they're worth. And that's a great time for you to swoop on in there and score a deal. Anyways, back to the rest of the video. So with the panels jointed, it was time to start doing a glue up. I did throw some dominoes in there for alignment. I was having a slight bow in it, and I just didn't want to deal with that. The solution really was to use cawls and keep it in place, but I'm lazy and I was working under a tight timeline, okay? I was supposed to have it done by Christmas, and if the release date of this video tells you anything, I did not make the release date. Yeah, well, I tried. Got the panel glued up, and from there it was all pretty straightforward parts for the panel processing. I needed to cross-cut them to length. I ran them through the table saw to get them to their final width, and the panels were more or less ready, and I repeated that process of milling for the drawer faces as well as the tops and the stretchers for the dresser. The tricky part now is how do we get those to stick together in a dresser shape? The easy, straightforward answer would be just domino it together and glue it and you're done. But because this was supposed to be a nice dresser that my wife wanted and was asking for, I thought I'd try and zhuzh it up just a little bit. And well, that bit me right in the ass. The initial plan was for the top panel of the dresser to join to the side panels. I want to do through dovetails. And so what that is, a through dovetail is where you take basically a flared out dado all the way through the piece. A dado is a groove, so a flared out groove all the way through that panel, maybe an inch deep or a half inch deep. And the idea is that once you put a matching flared piece of wood into that, it will lock in and you barely even need glue. It's an excellent, super strong joint. It's also a pain in the ass to make. Ian Curtis's channel, it's E.N. Curtis, all is one word on YouTube. He actually recently had a video talking about how to do that and just his thoughts on the through dado and other joinery methods for panels. But anyways, that was what I was gonna go with. And I was like, well, I've never done this before. How hard could it be? I've got my dovetail router bit. So cut the groove and then cut some to match on the panel and we'll stick it in there. So that's what I started doing. Step one was to mark out on the boards themselves where I wanted that groove to be. I knew I wanted that lip around the top, so I set it down a couple inches from the top ends of the panels and marked out the gaps there. And then on the top board, I just marked a half inch or so in, about the size of my dado router bit, in so that I knew where to cut those dados once it was ready to get to that step. Because I was gonna be using my router, I made a little jig for that to fit in, just some scraps of plywood. First, I was cutting through the jig itself, and then I started cutting into the piece, and I'll cut to live footage for what happened. Yep, that is what happens when you buy cheap bits and you aren't able to make multiple shallower passes. Downside of the dovetail is because of that angle, you can't start high, and make multiple iterative passes. You kind of have to go in one go. And when you got a 1/4 inch shank on your router bits and you're plunging through hardwood, well, it turns out it's just gonna snap right off. So I popped in a just straight cut bit and decided to do a straight dado instead. Ended up probably being for the best because it made it easier to then cut the matching groove. I still wasn't sure how I was gonna be doing that if it was dadoed. Once I had my groove, it was nice, straight and rectangular. I then cut matching grooves, first on a scrap test piece to make sure I got the fit right, and then on my larger panels, or the larger top panel. I cut that on the table saw here, just basically biting away at it because I didn't yet have a dado stack. Now obviously at this point, these are all very straight edges, very rectangular, and not particularly good to look at. And again, I'm no big designer, but I figured I should add at least a little bit of something to this. And so I wanted to put a curve along the bottom and add some feet to those side panels, just so it was up off the ground a little bit and there was something a little bit more visually interesting happening to it than it just being sharp-edged rectangles on every dimension. And so here's where, again, I think a helpful little tip shows up. They sell online for cutting these arches like plastic strips and other things you can use to get those marked. But an easy way is if you're already working with wood that long, just take one of your thin offcuts and use that. So you set down your piece and you mark how high you want the top of the arc to be in the center of the piece. Tack down the ends of the strip to where the ends of that arc should be. And then you flex up that board. Take your pencil, mark it along that edge, and boom, you've got a nice clean arc that you didn't have to worry about trying to freehand. Once I had that marked out, it was straightforward. Went over to the bandsaw, cut that arc, and then went to the oscillating spindle sander to smooth it out just right up to that final line. Again, that's all stuff I'm sure you've seen before, so we're gonna breeze on past it. After that excellent debacle of trying to do fancy joinery on the top, I decided to skip that for the bottom stretchers and just dominoed in place. And this is when I realized I forgot to account for what goes in the middle. So I went back to my designs and realized I had drawers floating in the middle attached to nothing. What that meant was I needed to do some redesigning on the fly. And I realized I had only bought basically enough lumber for the panels that are already there and the drawer faces, which I'd already milled up. I knew I couldn't do a full panel glue up in the middle there. So I went with kind of this ladder shaped design. And the only real downside of that was that it meant I now needed to make sure I knew where my slides were gonna go. And first thought is, okay, that's easy. Take that there. We know we're doing 8 drawers, so just divide that by 4 and you should have it set up. But these are undermount drawer slides. So that means they need to be shifted down. It wasn't a huge deal, it just meant there was a little bit more of that thought exercise to be done. But once that was all ready, it was really straightforward. I just needed to cut a couple strips of wood and then stick those together. You can see I laid it all out, quickly dominoed it together, and popped it into the frame that I had already constructed. And we're gonna end up right at where I made another mistake. So first I knew I was gonna be putting 1/4" plywood on the back, 1 to help it keep from racking, and 2 so that there wasn't just an open back dresser, because I think that's weird. So I measured how thick my plywood was and used an edge groove. What are they called? I've got it around here somewhere. Oh, well, it doesn't tell me what it is. It's the same kind of bit you actually use if you're making like composite decking outside that you want to fit together, because they have those little clips that fit between them. But it's just a little blade that looks like this. Here, I'll bring it up to the camera. This little blade that looks like this. And it's nice because they have fixed dimensions. The one I was using was 1/4" thick, and it had a 3/8 inch cutting depth. So that meant I could have a nice little bit of extra space around the groove while cutting to the right depth by just riding the bearing along the inside of the back of the dresser frame that I had built. So I got to doing that on the bottom back stretcher. I did that across the 2 side panels and along the top back panel. And as I did that, well, I'll cut to me in the past and he can explain it to you. So this is where I realized I messed up. This groove should be going that way, not that way. So I need to fill this back in and then re-groove it. Because the plywood is 1/4" thick, not 3/8 of an inch. But I've gone 1/4" that way, 3/8 of an inch this way when I want the other way. Damn it. Once I realized my mistake, and it was pretty straightforward how to fix it. And again, when you're woodworking, it's these sorts of fixes, I think, that separate, beginner, very low level woodworkers from mediocre ones like me, is starting to recognize and being able to adapt to these sorts of mistakes. I just finished off the rectangle, cut a thin strip of wood from an offcut from that same piece so the color matches quite well, glued that rectangle in place, and then planed it down smooth once the glue had dried. Again, a very easy fix and pretty low stakes here. This is going in the back of the dresser. No one's ever gonna see that again. Even when we move, no one looks at the back of a dresser. But I couldn't just leave it wrong. One, because dimensionally it was incorrect. It would have had a weird flex in the plywood. But also it just felt wrong to be making a piece for someone, even if it's gonna live in my house, and to have just something that I know was a glaring mistake just left as is. And I think that's the fun of woodworking. You can cut pieces off, glue pieces back on, and keep moving forward, and it's fairly forgiving. You just gotta give yourself the chance to try it. But the best part is, once that was there, I was able to throw the plywood on the back, and now we've got our dresser frame. The only last part is the drawers and the drawer slides. And those I've done a bunch before. You saw my, odds are you actually didn't, but I have another video on this channel where I made a miter station. So I've had a lot of practice making drawers. And for this, I wanted to do inset drawer faces. And all that really means, especially when you're doing undermount drawer slides, is you just need to account for the thickness of your face of your drawers when you set the slides in. To make these drawers, it's a pretty straightforward process. I ripped some plywood down to the rough dimension I wanted. I just went for an arbitrary, I think they're 7-inch tall drawers. The depth is set by the drawer slide length, which again was 15 inches. And the width of these drawers, once I marked out where the drawer slides were going to be going, is just the distance between those two drawer slides. The only difference between the drawers I make in this video and the drawers I made in the other ones is I wanted the joint to be a slightly stronger than just butt joints. Stumpy Nubs actually just really recently, this month I think, came out with a video about the joinery method that I used. So I'll link to that below, and if you want really detailed walkthroughs of how to set it up and how to cut these joints, his video is gonna be better than anything I would make. The short version is most drawers are just built like this. If this is the top-down view, they're just butt joints here. So you have one board, maybe you draw some pin nails in like that, and that's how you've got your first one made. The other option, if you wanted to get extra fancy, would be dovetails, and this would be from the, the front view of it. You would have, again, those flared grooves cut into it, and the other board, would be going into it or out this way with matching grooves like that. I wanted to meet somewhere in the middle where I had a little bit of strength with extra grooves, but was about as easy to cut as these butt joints. So instead, from the top, it looks something like this, where I have a notch in one board here and a matching notch in the sideboards. And so you end up with these kind of interlocking drawer faces that come together really easily. Again, I'll link to a video that walks through how to cut these, but you can basically just take your 1/4-inch router bit or a dado stack and cut this section out of this board, and then cut this section out of these boards. You got your front boards and your side boards, and then just like that, you're ready to go. You then just cut a small groove out of the bottom for the plywood bottom to fit, and you've got yourself a drawer box. And that's exactly what I did. When the drawer box is cut, I quickly glued those together and pin nailed everything in place, and just repeated that 8 times, which is more than I would prefer to do again. I'm not a huge fan of dressers at this point. I don't love making boxes. I don't love making drawers. So my next project, I'm really hoping will not have drawers or boxes, or if it does, maybe just 1 or 2. But either way, once I had all those boxes put together, the last part was just to put the drawer slides in and then put the face frames on. The face frames are one last tricky piece that there are a bunch of ways to do it, and I still haven't found one that I love. Basically, you need to make sure that you have your face frame shimmed out, and for that, I use playing cards. They're cheap and the same thickness. You can just stack up as many as you want to get the right reveal, and you get those in place. And for most of the drawers, you can just clamp it on, pull it out, drive some screws in, and then slide the drawer in, it's done. The tricky part is when you get to that top drawer. So the way that seems to work the easiest for me is to put some double-sided tape just at that top drawer. When you get it aligned, get the shims in there, and then use the double-sided tape to keep it attached while you drive those screws in. It feels sloppy to me, and then it means you're kind of just trapping and leaving double-sided tape in there. But also, who cares? It's double-sided tape and you're never gonna see it again. So maybe I'm whining about nothing. The last kind of tip of this project, though, that I really liked is this cheap little jig thing I bought on, I don't know, AliExpress or somewhere, that's just for mounting drawer hardware. It's just a couple pieces of plastic and some little drill guides, but you can line up exactly how wide the holes are on your handle hardware and then set it so that it's on, basically a little jig that's on fixed dimensions for every drawer. This thing costs like $8, maybe. This thing's done. I use Rubio Monocoat for the finish because this is a YouTube channel and I don't know any better. And then I hauled it upstairs. And you can check out these wonderful glamour shots. But yeah, that's pretty much the whole project. I enjoyed making it. I still don't like drawer boxes. So I probably won't be making a dresser for my next project. Actually, that's not true. This wood right here, I did a good enough job that I now get to make a matching dresser for in our closet. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. The fact that you're at the end of this video seeing this part is incredible to me. Thank you. Throw comments below if you have questions, if there's anything else you'd like to see. I should have another project done in a couple months. I think it's gonna be a fun one. I already know what it is, but I'm not gonna spoil it in case I change my mind because I reserve the right to do that. And maybe you'll see me in progress on it on the live streams. Otherwise, I'll get a video up later this year. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next project. In the meantime, go make something.